This program was first broadcast on Canterbury's community access radio station Plains FM 96.9 and was made with the assistance of New Zealand On Air.
It's time for Emergence News on Plains FM 96.9, citizen-made radio.
Welcome to Emergence News on Plains FM in Christchurch, New Zealand. It's April 2020 and due to the New Zealand nationwide lockdown with coronavirus, we are linking up online with the Zoom technology, and we welcome in Shafia and Peter.
Hi there, Nigel.
Hi there.
Hi. And of course, you will remember on our previous show, which was titled Who Else?, we talked about a number of individuals who have delivered the message to the world regarding the emergence of the spiritual hierarchy and the return of the world teacher Maitreya for this new age, the age of Aquarius, the age of cooperation, the age of sharing and justice, also the age of politics and economics, changing for the good of all mankind. On this program today, we continue that theme, Who Else? Part 2. So in addition to Benjamin Creme and his writings and his teachings, who else has spoken of the return of the re-emergence of Maitreya? So last time we spoke about the Indian philosopher Krishnamurti, and today, Shafia, you're going to be looking at his work up until his passing in 1986.
Yes, I'm going to be looking a little bit at his journey to from being the vehicle of or being prepared until he's changed. He refuted that role and taught on the freeing of mankind. That was his major message. And
Peter, you're going to take an in-depth look at Alice Bailey and the Russian woman Helena Blavatsky, and she was significant, wasn't she? Because she
really started things off. As far as Benjamin Creme is concerned, I think that's where he probably started. He certainly with the Alice Bailey teachings, but Blavatsky he knew very well as far as her writings are concerned.
And of course, she, as you say, she really launched things in the modern age regarding the release of the information from the ancient wisdom teachings.
That's right, indeed.
And another of the teachings released during the 1900s to help prepare humanity for this new age were the Agni Yoga teachings. And those teachings are also known as the living ethics. And this body of work is a path of daily practice, and it's practiced by many throughout the world. It's a yoga of fiery energy, and Agni means fire in Sanskrit. And much of the emphasis of the teachings is on fire and evolution, the yoga of consciousness, of responsible directed thought. And we'll take a closer look at that later on in the program. But coming up in just a moment, Peter's going to look at Alice Bailey and Helena Blavatsky. You're listening to Emergence News, and welcome. This is Who Else? Part 2, and here's Peter, who's going to look at Alice Bailey first up.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Yes, I've actually just been rereading Alice Bailey's unfinished autobiography, and although I've read it many years ago, it's absolutely fascinating. She's with so much she was brought up really, I suppose, in the aristocracy of England. And until she was probably about 15, she was a right spoilt little brat. And anyway, at the age of 15, she got a visit from the Master Katumi, and he just wandered into her boudoir one evening, and there he was in a turban, and terrified the living daylights out of her, to be quite honest. And anyway, he told her in no uncertain terms that she needed to sort out her personality. It was she had been a bit of a horrible child, and so she didn't know what to think about all this. But she did promise that she would work with him when he said that they had some work lined up for her later in her life. And she was absolutely amazed about all this. She wasn't a bad girl at all, in the sense she believed that everything she did was for Jesus. So that was her sort of main philosophy. And so it was only really bad in the sense of having a bad temper and being, unkind to people, I suppose, in some ways, often very, very short with her sister, and sometimes with her nanny and various other people. You don't realise how many servants and whatnot some of these richer households had. But her parents had died by the time she was 9. They'd both died of tuberculosis. So you can imagine the impact of any child. It would probably make them a bit cross and grumpy. So I can understand from that point of view that she had suffered a great loss. But she was surrounded by people that loved her and certainly kept her busy, and a very good education, I suppose, all sort of home education. So it wasn't really until in her early 20s, that she got to go to the army camps of India, where she was meant to sort of be one of the girls that made tea and looked after the troops and that sort of thing. And so she ended up becoming very adept, I suppose you might say, at developing a good rapport with soldiers away from home. And she kept very much herself to herself, and she cites one incident of some of the soldiers being completely unruly and throwing eggs at the wall, and just sort of being absolutely terrible in the canteen. And the following day, she invited them out for a picnic and didn't sort of criticize them at all for being bad people. But the following this lovely picnic they all had, they all came in and without a word cleaned up the whole place, scrubbed the walls. I think they did some repainting and all sorts of other things. And from then on, they were never a problem. So without criticizing, she just achieved what she really wanted. And so her life went on quite well until she met a trooper. He was a soldier, I think, just a private, but she fell in love with him. He was very good looking, and she fell in love with him, and eventually they got married. And so she had 3 daughters to this man, but he had a terrible temper, and he'd become a minister. And so he was very much meant to be a man of God, but he had this terrible temper which used to drive her to despair. And eventually they did get a divorce because she was in America by this time. But she had a very difficult time trying to make ends meet, even while he was a minister. But she ended up working one time in a sardine factory, and she became the best sardine packer into tins. So, she certainly had a fair share of the other side of life, just from being a spoiled brat sort of thing. So it wasn't until in her 20s that the Master DK came and said that he had a voice over her and came right into her head and said that he wanted her to do some books for her. And she said, well, she doesn't know him from a bar of soap, and she wasn't going to do anything because she was actually dedicated to the Master Kutumi, and who she hadn't really heard of either. So anyway, the Master Kutumi had to sort of come online, as it were, by mental overshadowing. and say, well, look, it's okay with me. So it was quite a hilarious situation if you think about it. But anyway, she eventually started writing the first book, I think, was Initiation, Human and Solar. It's not a big book, but it was sort of a test sort of scenario. It's about 230 odd pages. And, it does talk about the initiation, which we've sometimes talked about on this program, and lies in front of all of us with regard to developing our spiritual awareness and becoming more useful to humanity, really. It's about going through the process of initiation. But this happens at all levels. It happens at the solar level as well. Just as we go through the initiation, so too does our solar logos go through initiations. But of course, he's on a much higher level anyway. She ended up writing 19 books directed by the Master DK, and a huge volume of work they are. They're just incredible. Some of the books are about the ray structures and that sort of thing. There's actually 5 of them on the cosmic rays, and they're absolutely well worth reading. Anyone can actually read them, although it may take a while to get your head around what they all mean, but they're absolutely brilliant, and I can't recommend them highly enough to everyone. And she wrote also 5 books, I think, of her own that she wrote on, just really to show that she was an intelligent woman. And it proved later, I think she was, after she had died, that she was 3.2 initiate. So a very high initiate, really, and not as high as Madame Blavatsky. She was a 4th degree initiate. But anyway, Madame Blavatsky, of course, started the Theosophical Society, and she was the founder, really, of the Theosophical Society, and wrote books. The first book was actually Isis Unveiled, and it was a 2-volume book, a great weighty tome, but really talking about the beginnings of mankind. But so many of the conversations in there were refuting various scientists of the day, and she had a very logical mind. She was actually a Ray 1 soul, so very strong personality as well. I think Ray 1 personality as well. So she didn't take any of these the scientists of the day theories on face value. She looked at them and worked out whether they were right or wrong, and was prepared to go to battle with them, in argument form. So absolutely fascinating, Madame Blavatsky. As I say, she was 4th degree initiate. She's now a master, and incredible study. But the works of The Secret Doctrine and Isis Unveiled are somewhat more difficult, I find, to understand, but they do give a really good background on our history, I suppose, our planetary history, and the systems, the solar systems, and how it all works together. It's just absolutely mind-blowing if you first come across them.
So I understand she used to get her information from the Akashic records, didn't she? When she was...
Yes, she did, Shafia. Yes, she was very much tuned in. She spent time with the masters in the Himalayas, but she often had 1 or 2 of the masters pop in to see her from time to time. They just suddenly appear in front of her, and of course, people don't sort of really believe this. I think they're ghosts or something, but this is what happens at the higher level of initiates. The masters can interact with them, obviously, and they just appear and have a discourse and then disappear again.
Thanks, Peter. Fascinating stuff with Alice Bailey and Helena Blavatsky. Groundbreaking work by both those individuals.
This is the Emergence News on Plains FM. For more information, go to shareinternational.org.
Welcome back to Emergence News. Who else? Part 2. We're looking at individuals who have also brought the message of the re-emergence of Maitreya and the spiritual hierarchy. Over to you, Shafir.
Thank you. So I'm continuing with John's commentary on our last program about a teacher called Krishnamurti. John would have really loved to have done this because he's a great fan of Krishnamurti, but he's one of our frontline people out in the crisis of COVID, and so he couldn't be with us today. And I found it fascinating to go back in time and remind ourselves of the amazing people born toward the end of the 1800s, because these people were initiates who incarnated with the purpose to bring new thought and teachings for humanity. And they've been preparing the way all that time, and we're continuing to do that as we approach a climax of tension that we believe will bring the prophesied global leap of consciousness that will lead us to the new golden age. I'd like to point our listeners towards 2 other people who were instrumental in nurturing and educating Krishnamurti for this role. And they are Charles Webster Leadbetter and Annie Besant. They were both what we would call second-degree initiates, which mean that they had in their evolutionary journey mastered the astral emotional aspects of their natures. According to the esoteric wisdom, this is by far the most difficult initiatory stage to master. A second-degree initiate has the capacity to really serve the plan of God, which they do in many different ways, as demonstrated by other second-degree initiates such as Gandhi, Chopin, Marie Curie, and Einstein. So all true initiates will be working for the plan, and so you'll find a similarity of ideas in what they put forward. Annie Besant was an amazing lady who worked for women's rights and independence for Ireland and India, as well as many other causes that promoted the rights of ordinary people. She was married to an Anglican priest, but the marriage became untenable because of her progressive and unpopular views and actions. Politically very active, she was nearly jailed for the promotion and publication of a pamphlet advocating women's rights to access contraception, which would have been a big deal in those days. As a result of the court proceedings, which were eventually dismissed, she lost custody of her 2 children. When she discovered the Theosophical Society, her political life took a second place to this new spiritual discovery. She travelled extensively giving talks and lectures for the Theosophical Society and was known as a great orator. She eventually became the guardian to the young Krishnamurti and his brother Nityananda, because their mother had died and their father was unable to look after them. Charles Leadbetter was another Theosophical member, and him and Annie Besant became lifelong friends and co-workers, and he too wrote many books and articles which were widely published. Later in his life, he moved to Australia and was pivotal in forming the Theosophical Society in Australia and New Zealand. He was also a Catholic bishop in the Liberal Catholic Church and wrote the credo for the church liturgy, which goes like this: "We believe that God is love and power and truth and light, that perfect justice rules the world, that all his sons shall one day reach his feet, however far they stray. We hold the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man. We know that we do serve him best when best we serve our brother man. So shall his blessings and rest upon us and peace forevermore." Which is very much, Maitreya's message. And although it has a very patriarchal language of the time, you can see that message of an initiate coming through there. So Leadbetter came across Krishnamurti when he was around 10 years old, and with his clairvoyant abilities, he said he noticed the amazingly pure aura without a particle of selfishness surrounding the boy. The young Krishnamurti was dreamy and unfocused, and his teachers thought he was dim-witted. They often beat him, as did his father. Leadbetter saw him differently. He thought he had found the perfect vehicle for the Lord Maitreya and took him under his wing to educate and prepare him for this role. The daily program imposed on him by Leadbetter and his associates included rigorous exercise and sports, tutoring in a variety of school subjects, theosophical and religious lessons, yoga and meditation, as well as instruction in proper hygiene and in the ways of British society and culture, because Krishnamurti at the time was a very poor young Indian boy. At the same time, Leadbetter assumed the role of guide in a parallel mystical instruction of Krishnamurti. The existence and progress of this instruction was at the time known only to a very select few. Krishnamurti went through an intense, life-changing experience. This has been variously characterized as a spiritual awakening, a psychological transformation, and a physical reconditioning. It manifested when he complained of a sharp pain at the nape of his neck, sensitivity, loss of appetite, and occasional delirious ramblings. He seemed to lapse into unconsciousness, but later recounted that he was very much aware of his surroundings, and that while in that state he had an experience of mystical union, climaxing in the sense of immense peace. At first it was an almost nightly occurrence. Later the process resumed intermittently, with varying degrees of pain, physical discomfort, and sensitivity, and continued until the end of his life. He would occasionally lapse into a childlike state and sometimes an apparent fading of consciousness, which of course, as we would understand, would be when he would leave his body and go traveling in etheric consciousness. So as news of these mystical experiences spread, rumors concerning the messianic status of Krishnamurti reached fever pitch. In 1925, the Theosophical Society convention was planned on its 50th anniversary. There were expectations of significant happenings. Krishnamurti was uncomfortable with the growing adulation surrounding him, and that factions within the society were trying to position themselves favorably relating to the coming, which was widely rumored to be approaching. When his brother Nitya died of tuberculosis, he was devastated and triggering a crisis in Krishnamurti. Over the next few years, Krishnamurti's vision and consciousness continued to develop. New concepts appeared in his talks, discussions, and correspondence, together with an evolving vocabulary that was progressively free of the theosophical terminology. His new direction reached a climax in 1929 when he rebuffed attempts by Leadbetter and Besant to continue with the Order of the Star, which had been set up as an organization for the coming of Lord Maitreya. He dissolved the order, stating that he had made his decision after careful consideration during the previous 2 years. He stated, "I maintain that truth is a pathless land, and you cannot approach it by any path whatsoever, by any religion, by any sect. That is my point of view, and I adhere to it absolutely and unconditionally. Truth, being limitless, unconditioned, unapproachable by any path whatsoever, cannot be organized, nor should any organization be formed to lead or coerce people along a particular path. This is no magnificent deed, because I do not want followers, and I mean this. The moment you follow someone, you cease to follow truth. I am not concerned whether you pay attention to what I say or not. I want to do a certain thing in the world, and I'm going to do it with unwavering concentration. I am concerning myself with the only one essential thing to set man free. I desire to free him from all cages, from all fears, and not to found religions, new sects, nor to establish new theories and new philosophies." And that sounds very much like Maitreya, doesn't it? So Krishnamurti, after that, spent many years traveling the world teaching and lecturing on his ideas of freedom for humanity. And he appointed no one to succeed him, saying that people could follow his teachings just by living them. He died in 1986 at the age of 90 years old.
Welcome back to Emergence News. We're looking at the voices that have brought the news of the re-emergence of Maitreya and the spiritual hierarchy. And Shafir, of course, talking about the lifetime of Krishnamurti there and his early association with the Theosophical Society. And to finish the program today, we're going to take a quick look at the Agni Yoga teachings. These teachings are considered to be a continuation and part of the whole body of ageless wisdom teachings, which were given to the world by the masters through disciples such as Helena Blavatsky, Alice Bailey, and another Russian, Helena Roerich. Roerich was a disciple responsible for releasing the Agni Yoga teachings to the world, and she was a disciple of Master Moya and received these teachings by mental telepathy in Russian. Benjamin Krem says her teachings constituted one of the major attempts of the hierarchy to prepare humanity for the new age. And if you have seen the January issue of Share International magazine, there's an article there about her teachings and the artwork of her husband, Nicholas Roerich. And these teachings are completely relevant, entirely relevant to the present future time. So a little bit about Helena Roerich for you. She was a Russian theosophist, writer, explorer, traveling on horseback through Russia, Mongolia, Tibet, and China between 1924 and 1928. And I haven't got time to talk about those travels and exploration because her husband was an archaeologist. But she was a remarkable woman. She was a 4-degree initiate. So that explains just how influential she was. She was a public figure in Russia, the UK, America, and later in life in India. She worked in cooperation, as we've said, with the teachers from the East, and she was the author of The Living Ethics, The Teaching of Life, the Agna Yoga teachings. These teachings bridge the gap between the spiritual and the scientific. Her work has been significant in bridging the gap between the East and the West, particularly the introduction of Asian religion to the Western world. I'm just giving you an edited account of her life really here, but after 1928, her family settled in the ancient valley in the northern India near the Himalayas, and this was after that great expedition through Central Asia to India. And between 1929 and 1938, she wrote and published another 11 titles of the Agna Yoga teachings. In the early 1930s, Roerich then translated 2 volumes of The Secret Doctrine from English to Russian. Now, those volumes Peter talked about earlier in the program, and that was the work of Helena Blavatsky. And this work allowed the Russian language readers to become acquainted with the important theosophical studies of the time. In the 1940s, 2-volume editions of Helena Roerich letters were published explaining the foundations of existence, the place and role of man in the universe, in the cosmos, and the relationship between spirit and matter. Here, Helena Roerich pays attention to the cosmic laws that determine the motion of planets. And again, this Peter talked about that earlier in regard to Blavatsky's work. And Roerich explains that these laws influence the social processes of human life. A lot of the work that Helena Roerich did over the years was in close cooperation with her husband, Nicholas Roerich, who was a 2-degree initiate himself. And as I said, there is a story in the January edition of Share International regarding Maitreya within the Agna Yoga teachings. And there's a number of Nicholas Roerich's artwork published in that edition. Well worth having a look at.
All this information can be found on the Share International website, www.share-international.org. Scorpio Books in Christchurch carries the magazine and some books. And also don't forget the podcasts, which are available on the Plains FM website.
We welcome your comments, questions and feedback. Please contact us at emergencenews@gmail.com.
The opportunity to join our transmission is available Monday and Wednesday evenings and Thursday mornings, which gives us the possibility to do a service meditation in conjunction with Masters.